Yesterday when I came to the Kotel, I couldn't believe that it was empty. Someone told me it was because of the two Piguyim, the two tragedies, the two attacks that happened yesterday in Yerushalayim, so people didn't want to come out, and there's no tourists. So I understand it pales in comparison maybe to the whole thing, but in a way it was like Jerusalem was even more alone. And then when you read the news today and you hear about how Israel is being attacked for being a victim, like, basically like almost criticizing the Jews during the Holocaust, why they resisted or something, and you feel isolated, and you feel alone, and yet we're here, no empire and no nation, all of those, who they may be, whether it's the French government or the British or all the others, no surprise they were silent 60 years ago when Jews were being massacred, and there clearly there was no accusations of all the accusations being charged of Israel. So we're a nation that sits alone. In another verse it says, Am levaded yishkin. It's a nation that sits alone. Yet we're the only ones that survived it all. So we take a lot of strength in that. And that in essence is really the answer to the whole dilemma and that paradox I was mentioning. Because it's exactly correct. When you believe in God, and you believe in a deeper power and a deeper truth that can survive anything, then no darkness can vanquish us. And that's exactly where the greatest strength is born, is when there is the moments of the deepest darkness. And I once asked Eli Wiesel, who I'm friendly with, he was friends with my father, my late father. So I once asked him, I said, is it true that in the concentration camps, that the Jews would sing sometimes Ani Mamin, I believe with complete faith, Mashiach's coming, or say Kaddish, say Shema, you hear it. So he said, yeah. He says he never really heard it when they went to the gas chambers because the area where they were was a little distant from there. But he definitely heard many times in his own place people crying and saying these prayers and so on. And I said, let me ask you a question, skeptic's question. How is it that in such dark moment, where the Jews could have had all the arguments against, grievances against God for forsaking them, I mean the worst possible way possible, in an inhumane way, how is it possible that they held on to such faith and not only weren't angry and upset at God, they thanked Him actually. Say Shema, Kaddish, sing Ani Mamin, I believe with complete faith. I remember what he said, and I'm paraphrasing because at least the way I understood, is that the Jews always knew, and that's what they were saying there too, you can kill our bodies, but you can't kill our souls. You can take our lives, but you can't take our faith. And our spirits will always live on. And if it won't be us, it will be our children. If it won't be our children, it will be our grandchildren. This is what a person of faith has. Something you cannot vanquish because it's immortal. You can only see it in the darkest moments. Because when things are going well, our deepest strengths are not necessarily obvious. Now, God forbid, I'm not justifying or trying to suggest that we need to have and we should have any type of negative experiences in order to bring out our deeper strengths. But we have to remember that there are strengths that we're all capable of we can never imagine. They say this about women, that women are like tea bags. You don't know how strong they are until you put them into hot water. I'm not sure who said it exactly. But you could say the same about the Jewish people in general. And it's a verse actually in the Torah. The first of all our challenges, the first genocide of them all in Egypt, over 3,000 years ago. It says when the Egyptians enslaved the Jews, I see you smiling. Do you agree? That you know how strong a woman is until you put her into hot water? Okay, good. You should never be into hot water. What can I tell you? When men are put into hot water, they yell and say it's hot. That's what they do. And women discover deeper strengths. It's a reverse sexist statement. Anyway, going back to this, when the Jews were in Egypt and they were enslaved, it says a verse, it says, Kashayana Esam. As they were oppressed, Kain Yirba v'Kain Yifritz. That's how much they multiplied and they proliferated and they grew. Because that's how it is, and we see it from ourselves. When you're challenged, it brings the best out of us. The Talmud puts it this way. It says, an olive does not produce oil until you press it. And the more you press it, the deeper the oil that comes out of it. So that's exactly why Mashiach is born in the throes, in the abyss of darkness, because that's when the deepest strength comes out. You see, Jewish theology, our faith, does not dictate, does not allow for anything that is evil, just as, there's no concept of original sin. There's no concept of evil with no end. Everything has a deeper purpose. Even when we suffer, and even when we go through difficult experiences, there's also a deeper purpose in that. Again, it's not a justification, but there's deeper purpose. So therefore, the flames could be going as high as they can. The temple was being destroyed in the worst possible way. But at that given moment, is the deepest strength was born. We still sit Shiva. We still cry on Tisha B'Av. This doesn't mean we dance and celebrate. But we recognize that sometimes the greatest strengths lie embedded in layers and layers of darkness. And that's exactly what this moment is right now. As we're right now, this time in Israel, as Tisha B'Av comes to close, which is the next few hours, that's when we say Mashiach was born. As a matter of fact, the Arizal, those if you haven't prayed yet the afternoon prayer, or you will pray, you'll see we say an additional prayer called Nachem. It's a consolation prayer, consoling us. So the Arizal, Isaac Luria, the great mystic who lived up in Sfas, he says and explains based on this medrash. On this medrash it says that because Mashiach is born now, that's why we say Nachem in the darkest moment of Tisha B'Av. And this also explains why an Arab farmer of all. I think with latest events here, it becomes even more surprising that an Arab would tell us this news. But there's an interesting statement in the Talmud. I don't know if you're familiar with this. You know, the great prophecies, when you read the books of the prophets, and they prophesize the future of the world, a world of peace and harmony and so on. So the greatest of all the messianic prophecies is by a prophet called Avadja. Avadja. So we have Isaiah, there's Ezekiel, Yecheskel, you have Yirmiyahu I mentioned. You have others. You have Amos, you have Micha, you have a whole bunch of prophets. But the greatest of all is Avadja. So the Talmud asks a question. Avadja was a convert. He wasn't a born Jew. He was a convert. He came from Edom, from the children of Esav. And he converted. So the Talmud asks, why is the greatest prophecy coming from a convert? Not in any way, God forbid, because he's a second-class citizen. The Torah makes it very clear that you should love a convert just as you love a born Jew. But why specifically him? And the answer is fascinating answers. The Talmud answers it as it usually does with a metaphor. It's an Aramaic expression that says, "Meneu ba abba lishde bei narge." What does that mean? That to cut down the tree of a forest, you need an axe that's made out of the wood of the tree. An axe has obviously the sharp blade, but it also has a handle, and the handle is always made out of the wood. The Talmud is giving us in one sentence an essence of really a lot of modern technology and even modern medicine. You know, for example, antibiotics or homeopathy. What do? They take a strain from an infection that could kill us, and build up immunity to it. That itself helps save us. Because the best way to protect someone is from the disease itself. If you can turn the disease into a cure, then the disease has no ability to control. If you, for example, overpower the disease with some other application or some other intervention, so the disease, it's a question, what's more powerful, the disease or the cure? But if the cure comes from the disease, then you can never be attacked by it again. That's why you find that as we get older, we have less common colds. Because cold, basically the common cold is a strain of bacteria. Once you had it once, you never get it again because your body builds up immunity to it. I don't want to compare it, but there's also, you'll find animals that they build their immunity to all our so-called pesticides and so on. Because once you build up your strengths, that no longer can attack you. All this is captured in one line in the Talmud, that the cure for something has to come from the disease itself. Avadja was from the children of the people who would ultimately destroy the Beis HaMikdash. He lived earlier than the second temple, but during the first temple. Avadja came from the children of Esav. Esav is the father of Rome, the father of the Christian world, the father of the world that would fight Jacob. Esav Sena Yaakov. Esav was the twin brother, and Avadja came from Esav. So who is giving us the greatest prophecy about Mashiach is the enemy itself when he's transformed, like the axe that cuts down the tree. That's what the Talmud says. So who's giving us the prophecy? Who's telling that sage that his cow in a field groaned and saying that Mashiach was just born? It's an Arab farmer. Because our belief is, ultimately, we're not interested in killing Arabs or Muslims. We're interested that they be transformed, just like Abraham, their father, taught them. And just like the Christians used to be wild, and they led the Crusades, and maybe even were more radical and more warlike than anyone ever, and ultimately they got tamed. Our goal is the transformation of the entire world. So perhaps that's what the Medrash is hinting to, that the Arab farmer is the one that tells the Mashiach was born. Yeah, some of us may feel we're not yet ready after the events that have been going on here these past days. We all know a ceasefire, what they call Hafsakat Esh in Hebrew. At the end of the day, it's exactly that. It's like putting out a fire, but the source of the fire is not gone. A lot of firefighting going on. But we come and stand in Tisha B'Av, and we know that we're invincible, because no disease could destroy us, because even the diseases themselves became cures. And the proof is in the pudding. We're standing right now in a spot, and I want to just show, you can all see it, but I just want to scan where we are right now. So this is a real history going on here. First of all, let me just begin before you do that. It says that at this place, where the Temple Mount right behind me, is where the creation of the world began. What they call the Dome of the Rock. Why is it called the Dome of the Rock? Because they build a mosque right on top of the Holy of Holies, which itself, imagine we did something where their mosques are. So right inside there is a thing called Evan Hashthiyah, which means in English a foundation rock. It says this is the rock upon which God created the beginning of the world. It's where Adam was created, and later this is where Abraham. And here, if you scan all the way there, those are the mountains of Beersheba. We look to my left, extreme left. When it says Vayisa Avram, and he lifted his eyes, and he looked where? He looked to the Har HaMoriah, which is the place where he offered Isaac. So we're literally in a spot here. For all you know, Abraham may have walked right here where we are. Obviously, there was no building then, and there was no Abraham's tent. But there was a place here. So who knows who walked there? And that's where they climbed from Har HaMoriah. The area you see here, if you go right here, is areas where, right there is the Har HaZeisim. Let's go over that. The Mount of Olives, which is the famous Mount of Olives, which people still wonder how many people can still be buried there. One small mountain, but they keep being buried. And you have here, what did you tell me was in this area?
This is David.
Here, David, okay.
And that's what Eden crossed into
the from there, right there is the east river, the east bank of the River Jordan. You go straight, it's straight over there. So the Eden, when the Jews entered Israel, Promised Land, is right. We're standing right here. Now, if you move this way, so you say here, this is the southwestern wall, right? The southwestern wall of where the Beis Hamikdash was. Shara Chulda was called. The gate of the Chulda is they called it a Chulda, I'm not sure. But
Prophetess.
Huh? Prophetess. Was the name of the prophetess. And I don't have to describe the so-called mosques that are here. You can see them on your own. But this is what Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues saw. The famous story in the Talmud, where Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues were looking down at the Har HaBayis, and it was now desolate and barren. And his colleagues began to cry, because they saw the tragic fulfillment of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, of the temple. And what did Rabbi Akiva do? Rabbi Akiva began to laugh. That's what it says. And they asked him, why are you laughing? This is a sad moment here. Tragic moment. He said, I'm laughing because just as you see the fulfillment of the tragedy, I see the fulfillment of the prophecy that after the tragedy there will be something even greater built. You can see a building sometimes being razed with a Z, being destroyed. So you see it and you say, hey, that's how terrible that is. But if you know that the building is being knocked down in order to build a much better building, then there's something to laugh about. Why did Rabbi Akiva laugh and they didn't? They also knew the prophecy. For the same reason, Rabbi Akiva was a Baal Tshuva. Until the age 40, Rabbi Akiva never knew a word of Torah. Some say he was a convert as well. Some say he was a child of converts. Regardless, he definitely was not born, he was not an FFB, let's put it that way, in the modern parlance, modern language. Rabbi Akiva, as a famous story goes, from birth. Yeah, he must have been from, but he wasn't knowledgeable. So the story goes, Rabbi Akiva fell in love with the Kalba Sapur, the daughter of a wealthy a businessman here in Yerushalayim. And she started inspiring him to begin studying. He was 40 years old. And he said, I'm 40 years old. 40 years old, it was a half a lifetime. Then it was probably a complete lifetime. He said, 40 years old, what could I do? How could I change my life? So he was walking one day, it must have been also somewhere in these areas here, and he passed by a brook of water. And he's observing, ruminating on a water flowing, and he sees in one little corner near the edge of the river, he sees a stone that's perfectly bored through, like a hole, drilled through, perfect hole right in the middle of the stone. And he was wondering who made this perfect hole in the stone. And then he realized that the brook of water, there was a little waterfall, and the drops of water were dropping through that hole. And over the years, it finally made a perfect hole, and it kept on dropping and dropping. And he said to himself, and obviously he was, as you could see what he turned out, he was not a slouch. He said to himself, if drops of water could pierce a stone, an inanimate stone, how could I even question whether the Torah, which is compared to water, cannot pierce my own ignorance and my own background and so on? Which is also a tremendous lesson in life. Many of us think we get hardened by life, we can't change old habits, patterns, routines, etc. People at 20 years old are telling me already their lives are doomed, And we have to remember that the spirit is resilient and is not made of stone, even if it appears so. And it's a matter of persistence. So Rabbi Akiva then, with the inspiration of his bride, determined to go study. She encouraged him, and he came back 14 years later. 28 years later, there's a whole story about it, but that's not relevant right now. And thousands of students. Kula liba de Rabbi Akiva, the Talmud tells us. The entire Talmud is basically Rabbi Akiva's teachings. So he didn't just become a scholar. He became the scholar of all scholars. The greatest, all of Talmud is a result of Rabbi Akiva's teachings. All a man, just like I said before with the wood of the axe, that the transformation comes always from the darkest point. He was a place where he was not knowledgeable, he had not had education for whatever reason, and he's a man. So that's why when he looked at the Temple Mount, everybody saw desolation and destruction. What did he see? He saw the future. There's some people who see the potential in us, and some people see what we are. I don't know if Tisha B'Av is a good time to quote this, but why not? It works for the story here. When President Nixon resigned from the White House in 1973, Watergate. Yeah. So they say Henry Kissinger was then Secretary of State, and he writes in his memoirs that when Nixon was leaving the White House, was ready to go to sign the resignation papers, his resignation, so he walked by a big portrait of JFK, who JFK became idolized after he was assassinated. So he saw a big portrait, and this is what he said. He said, they love you because you remind them of what they could be. And they hate me because I remind them of who they are. Now, what JFK would have been had he lived, who knows? But the point I'm making here is, I'm sure you all have friends, and you all have people that you may know, that every time you speak to them, they always bring you down a notch. If you're optimistic or enthusiastic, they say, don't get so excited, don't be so naive. Right? And then there are people, whoever you talk to them, you always feel uplifted. You go away from them. Basically it comes down to a simple formula. People you meet, do they drain you or do they empower you? And Rabbi Akiva, when he saw, sometimes you see desolation. Say, hey, look how terrible it is here. They say, the one about the classic optimist is the little farm boy comes into a big barn that's filled with manure all the way to the top. So most people would say one word, which I don't want to say here now, And this little boy says, there must be a pony in here somewhere, So there are people who see the light at the end of the tunnel. And Rabbi Akiva, because of what he experienced in life, he was able to see the positive in everything. So wherever everyone else cried, and it was legitimate to cry, listen, we cry in Tisha B'Av. He was able to look beyond it and transcend the moment and say, this is the birthing of something greater. If someone walked into a delivery room and a new mother is about to deliver a baby and the baby's not out yet, and they hear the mother screaming and yelling, they think she's being killed. They think that someone's trying to torture her. And then suddenly you see the birth of a child, but if you didn't see it through, you'd think this is terrible. The greatest things are birthed sometimes in most painful moments. The Baal Shem Tov has a very beautiful analogy of a spiral staircase. Calls it Schwindeltreppe. In Yiddish, any of you know Yiddish? Schwindeltreppe in German. Schwindeltreppe is in German, spiral staircase. They call it Schwindeltreppe. You know why Schwindel? Because in Yiddish and now German too, Schwindel means swindling, a swindle. Swindle is like a deception. Because a regular staircase, you climb and you go up. A spiral staircase, when you turn, you have to keep turning. And you turn your back to the destination. You could sometimes think you're not even climbing. And right before you reach the apex, the top of the stairs, you have to turn completely around, and your back is facing, and you think maybe you never reached your destination. You think you're even further than your destination than you were yesterday. Because yesterday you were at least seeing the destination. Now you made one final turn, and your back is to the destination. The Baal Shem Tov says this is an analogy for life. Sometimes you go through things that are very difficult, and you don't see it through. Had you waited 2 more minutes, had you waited 2 more days, maybe, whatever time, you suddenly reached where you wanted. Because life is a spiral staircase, not a straight staircase. And a spiral staircase swindles us. It deceives us into thinking that you've not reached the top. And this is exactly the story of Tisha B'Av. So it's not like we disregard the pain, the loss, and so on. Is that we recognize that within this is the birthing. In the belly of the beast is the birthing of the greatest events in life. That's why it says in the Medrash that when Mashiach comes, Tisha B'Av will be the greatest day. So I want to apply this a little to our own personal lives, a little more than I just said right now. Before I continue, I want to first of all acknowledge Abraham's tent for hosting this. Rabbi Akiva. Abraham's tent here is Yerushalayim. That's like a hostel for, I don't know how to describe but for students, would you say? For young men and women? For Shabbos, right?
Chabad house and hostel.
Chabad house and a hostel right here. So we're on there, not the rooftop, but the porch. And that's where you see this whole scene, which, as I said, makes you laugh and makes you cry. I say the other way around. Makes you cry, makes you laugh. But there's no question that where we are standing now is saturated with history. And I say it, I'm here as a guest right now, visiting, hopefully coming here permanently very soon. Maybe I won't have to even go back to New York. And everyone will come here. But I see it's important to remember that we cannot afford to be complacent. I feel extremely proud and very to say that I'm part of the Jewish nation. When you see young soldiers who are ready to give their lives, and many have, over 60 in the last few weeks, to protect their brothers and sisters, there's no greater act on earth. There are people ready to sacrifice their lives. There's much to be said about government policies and how to finally put this to an end without having to just put out fires. But that's not the moment for right now. So to be here now, in the Rebbe's words, the safest place on earth. People say, why is it so safe? You mean you have rockets and so on? Well, without Tiftach Peh, but after 3,000 rockets, relatively speaking, being literally raining down on our major cities, and you have barely casualties. Every casualty is a life, so I don't want to in any way quantify it. But it's a miracle. 3,000 rockets in a small country like this. For the size of New Jersey, for American context. And it's reminiscent during the 6-Day War. There was also very few casualties when this part of the world was finally conquered by the Jews. And we were able to go to the Kotel and celebrate there. I want to say this to all my brothers and sisters everywhere. Yesterday the Kotel should have been filled with millions of people, to be honest. But I guess people still live in this world and they make calculations. And have their fears, and I'm not here to criticize, but I have to say is that we have nothing to be afraid of. There's an expression by Hasidim that says, when you're tied above, you don't fall below. There's a story behind it. That there was this town in Russia. Russia is a pretty cold place in the winter. So one of the Hasidim, two young Hasidim came there for a Shabbos, and they asked, where's the mikveh? Before Shabbos, they wanted to go to the mikveh, to the ritual bath. They said in the winter nobody goes because it's slippery slopes, and you can't really get there because it's very difficult, it's very icy. They said, no one goes? They said, yeah, one older chassid goes. How does he make it? No one knows. So they were skeptics, so they decided to follow him. They see him walking down the slopes, right? They're slipping in this, they break their arms and legs, and he makes it without any problem. Goes to the mikveh, comes back. Afterwards, they asked him, how did you do it? We were young, you're an older man. How were you able to navigate on those slippery slopes? And his answer was, in Yiddish, he said, eben, fällt man nicht unten. When you're tied above, you don't fall below. There's much to fear in this world, but only if you tie your future and your destiny to temporary, impermanent things. I always find it ironic that in the business world they call certain things securities. Called securities, as if money Money runs out, and money is the most insecure thing. Look at people with money; they're the most insecure people, because if you build your future on something that is temporary, how secure can your future really be? So it's all what we bind ourselves to. Now, this is an opportunity at this time is to connect to what matters. The reason we are eternal, Am Yisrael Chai, and we are an eternal nation that is able to prevail, was precisely, and why no darkness could kill us, is because we were tied above. We never invested and said that we're going to get security from other people's approval, or from money, or from empires, or from all the material possessions. That is not going to give us security. Those are blessings to have, and every Jew should be blessed with prosperity, materially, spiritually, in every way. But to build your foundation on it, imagine building a foundation that is shaking all the time. The food we eat, the money we make, even our physical looks, anything in the material world erodes, ages, withers, and dies. Spirit never dies. So on Tisha B'Av, the thing that gave us power, the thing that gave those Jews power in the Holocaust, the thing that gave Jews power in any given situation, was always that they tied their destinies to something that was eternal and immortal, something that was not man-made. I know I didn't say the word God, but it was God. The reason I don't say the word God so often is because a lot of people have a problem with the word God. So you can call it whatever name you like. You know the story I always tell about this, and I gave a class years ago in New York. So the people who were coming from the arts and entertainment industry, and they were very skeptics, spiritual but not traditional, Jewish. They were all Jewish but not traditional. You know, many of them would say they got their spirituality from Zen Buddhism maybe, and some Sufis and some LSD as well. Yeah. So I remember years ago, so I tried an experiment because I thought even before I opened my mouth, a beard with a yarmulke, I'm not projecting a neutral image. And people stereotype. There's a lot of stereotypes about religion. Many of them are legitimate, actually. So I tried an experiment. I didn't use any loaded words, no religious words. I didn't use the word God. I didn't use the word Torah. I didn't use the word mitzvahs. I didn't use the word Mashiach. None of that. Definitely didn't use Tisha B'Av and so on. But instead of God, I used the word the essence of reality, the higher reality. Instead of Torah, I used the word blueprint or map, roadmap. Instead of mitzvahs, connections. And instead of Mashiach, Geula, I used the word destination. And here I was waxing eloquent about a journey into the essence of who we really are, the essence of reality. If it was a more New Age crowd, I would use words like undefined layers of unconscious energy or something. And a journey into the essence of reality, following this roadmap, this blueprint, making the connections, till we reach the destination where there'll be total fusion of matter and spirit, matter and energy, when there'll be a seamless whole of the inner and the outer of your life and of all of existence. And people, I remember, they were like mesmerized. Wow, this is fascinating stuff coming from... And after a few weeks, a guy came over to me. I'll never forget it. And he said to me, "Are you talking about God?" I said, "Yes, but shh, don't spoil it for the others." You know? And I realized that language is critical. You know, we today, in this world of therapy, everybody says you got to open up. You have to break the silence. Because how does anyone know? Not your parents, not your spouse, not your friends. How do they know what you feel if you don't speak? So communication. Some of us talk too much. You know, once you open up, you don't know how to stop talking. You know, the Jew comes to a priest and says he wants to confess his sins. So the priest is so overwhelmed that a Jew is finally coming, and in his mind seeing the light. So he says to him, "Why are you suddenly coming? What made you understand and realize that I'm the person to come to?" He says, "Don't take it personally. I'm telling everybody." You know? But the point is, sometimes people start talking, they talk too much. But communication also has another side to it. Words are loaded. Sometimes you use a word when you communicate with someone, and you see they go crazy. Even though for you it's innocuous, it's an innocent word. Because words are loaded. And when you use a word, it's critical. I speak as a communicator, as a writer. It's not the words you use, it's you have to get the message across. And if a word is loaded, best not to use that word. Not to be deceptive, simply to be able to communicate. And this is true in relationships, it's true in almost any given situation. I say this all as a small introduction, going back to what we're discussing here. We all have unbelievable resources inside of us. If you have friends that bring you down, maybe you should start adding new friends into your list. I'm not telling you to get rid of those friends overnight, but maybe it's time to start a new Rolodex, a new, what do you ever call it, contact list. Rolodex is already outdated. A new contact list, and find people who believe in you. You know, I could tell you where I grew up. I grew up in New York. I grew up in Brooklyn and Crown Heights. I had the merit for many years to work for the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. A lot of ideas that I share are based on his teachings. And if you asked him, he'd say his teachings are based on his father-in-law's teaching, going back all the way to Moses, the Torah. And he was a man that believed in people. I would not be standing here today had the Rebbe not believed in me. And there are thousands of people who met the Rebbe that tell you exactly the same thing. That you felt empowered, you felt that you could make a difference. And I look around, in this world there's 7 billion people. And many of us feel, frankly, negligible. We feel unnecessary, indispensable. We feel like, so what? If I do something great, I don't do it. Who really cares? I have my little circle of family, friends, people who love me. But in the big cosmic scale, what difference does it really make? And simply not true. This is why Jews are also here today, because they knew every act that they did changed the world in one way or another. It may not be obvious right away. Here Abraham walked from there to here, right? One man. And imagine him telling himself, what could one man do? But he changed the world. This Abraham, Echad Hoya Avram, became the father, not just of the Jews, 14 million Jews. 4 billion people on this planet consider Abraham as their father. 2.5 billion Christians and 1.5 billion Muslims. 4 billion people, because one man had a vision. One man paid a price. This is what we Jews have always known. And Tisha B'Av, as strange as it may sound, saddest day in the calendar, in a way exposes it even more than Purim. Purim we celebrate, obviously in full glory, and Adela Yada beyond super-rational exuberance and so on. But Tisha B'Av, you'd think, is a sad day. It should make us bitter, break us, make us feel depressed, hopeless, and the opposite. Because as I said before, the disease itself, that which doesn't kill you, makes you stronger. So a day like this, in a strange way, gives us more strength, because it means nothing can destroy us. Not a temple being destroyed. We go to the wall. Look at the wall last night, today. It's a broken wall, basically. And you could think of it, if you think of it in aesthetic terms, when you walk down the steps from the Rova here, to the wall, the wall, the first thing you see is the big golden, some call it pimple, some call it dome, whatever you want to call it.
Yarmulke.
Yarmulke. You know that one with Bialik? Bialik was walking in the streets here as well. And just reminded me. Free association. And he was walking down the streets and he was looking in Meir Sharim and he was looking for a shul. So he asked one of the Yiddish boys in Yiddish, where's a shul, Ingela? Little boy, where's a shul? So the boy says, a shul? A shul is not for Yidden. A shul is only for Jews. So he says, mind you, they're talking fluent Litvish Yiddish. He says, why do you think I'm not Jewish? He says, you're not going with a kippah, with a yarmulke. So Bialik says, Bialik was a poet, and he was also a yeshiva student. He knew his stuff. So Bialik says, kippah tashamayim. The whole heaven is my kippah. The whole heaven is my yarmulke. So the little boy says to him, too big of a yarmulke for such a small head. That's what he said. Anyway, that's as an aside. The point I want to make is that I was saying that nothing so Tisha B'Av. So you look at the wall; it's a broken wall. I look at the stones; they're uneven. They've been weather affected. Some of them are chipped, some of this, and you could look at it. It doesn't have the beauty and aesthetics of these mosques. It doesn't have the sounds of the angelic hymns that start sounding here on Friday afternoons, especially. From the churches, we have the Christian quarter, the Jewish quarter, the Muslim quarter, and the Armenian quarter. I was driving here, the cab driver says to me, why do we only have a quarter? He says, Israel, why do we only have a quarter of land? Do you imagine the United States only has a quarter? Anyway, I won't go into that, that's another discussion. So, you have all these beautiful sounds, beautiful sights, and you walk downstairs, and what do we have? A broken wall. And it's not even the wall of the temple, it's an outer wall. And you can think of it as the weakest item, the weakest, everything good?
It stopped.
When? we could think of it as the weakest or the most. Let's say, how proud can we be of this wall? But there's an expression by Chassidim that says the following: there's nothing as straight as a crooked ladder. There's nothing as crooked as a straight lie, and there's nothing as whole as a broken heart. This wall may be broken and may only be part of a once a glorious temple that stood here, but there's nothing as whole as a broken, because it's real. It's real. It's one thing to put up a cosmetically beautiful, artificial, aesthetically pleasing piece of architecture. There's a lot of superficial stuff in this world, but to be able to be broken and still endure, that is eternity. So the wall has absorbed and saturated in it the thousands, millions of prayers that were said around here. It's a wall that's a witness to all that took place here, the destructions, the positive things as well, as I said before. So on one hand, it can make you cry, just a bare wall. But on the other hand, if you think about it, it's formidable, it's awesome, because it withstood it all. I mean, what are the odds that it should still be standing? What are the odds? And the Rambam says, Maimonides writes, that this place here, Kedusha leZazim and Kema, it's a holiness that never moves from its place. That's why it's prohibited to go on the Temple Mount, even though there's no temple there, because the earth and the ground is saturated. It's a sign of eternity. So I go back to our own personal lives. Nothing can vanquish us. We are forces of eternity, but you have to be tied to above. If you tie yourself to the artificial and superficial things of this world, then your destiny is bound with that. You tie yourself, as we do now in Tisha B'Av, we completely commit. As difficult as life has been, and frankly, compared to our ancestors, this is paradise. But even with the difficulties even taking place right now, I feel this when I came here. On one hand, everybody's concerned. There's a higher sensitivity. But on the other hand, I don't see despair. I don't see people wringing their hands. People recognize that we have a strength that is impossible to destroy. But that doesn't mean we have to be stupid either. We have to be wise and behave the proper way and understand who's an enemy is an enemy. And when there's the declaration of war, don't think it's peace, etc., etc. So these moments here, as Tisha B'Av comes to a close, and see the sun is setting finally. What time is it now? 7:15. Huh? 7:15. We take strength from this day, the saddest day in the calendar, on the holiest place on earth. So there you go. The paradoxes come together. And if you look at your own life, it's pretty much the same. We look at ourselves. Our lives are pretty absurd. One day things are great. Another day you really feel down. Then you feel great again. When the first Ferris wheel was invented, I think it was in the 19th century, in Vienna. It was a famous Ferris wheel. I think it's still there. So someone talked about, someone had brought a picture of it to the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Chabad Rebbe. And he right away learned a lesson from it. This fellow was going through difficult times. He'd been wealthy and he had lost his money. He had other issues, challenges. So the Rebbe said to him, this Ferris wheel is a lesson for life. What's a Ferris wheel? It's always turning. It's always turning. When you're on top, don't think you're always going to be on top. It's going to turn. And when you're on the bottom, don't think that's where you will remain. It's always a turn. Like I said, a spiral staircase. And this lesson sounds so simple, but most of us don't really relate to it. Today we've discovered the concept. Only human beings can have invented the concept of a couch potato. You know what a couch potato is? You sit. What are you doing? Nothing. And we're like proud. Today I'm doing nothing. There's a guy, Yankel, sitting on a park bench. He's very sad and depressed, despondent. And his friend comes and says, well, Yankel, why are you so down? He says, my wife is very angry at me today. He says, what's new? She's always angry at me. He says, no, now it's really bad. Why? Because this morning she asked me, she went to work, she asked me, what are you going to do? And I said, nothing. So she said to me, you said that yesterday you're going to do nothing. And I told her I wasn't finished. Not finished doing nothing, So we've learned the art of doing nothing. I know a guy, he's a cardiologist, comes to my classes, and he's very difficult. He went through an ugly divorce recently. He's a lot of challenges in his life. He's a very nice guy. He always tells me, Rabbi, can you just give me a blessing for complete calm and peace in my life? Such a roller coaster. So I said, how peaceful do you want it to be? He said, completely peaceful. I said, like a straight line? As a cardiologist, he didn't like that exactly. He said, no, not a straight line. If you ever see a cardiogram is a wave, a heartbeat. We breathe. 18 breaths an average person takes every minute. Do you ever think about it? Life is mobile. Life is in flux. Life is moving all the time. It's for some reason human beings feel like it's some type of accomplishment if we could stop the movement. But nobody wants death. But remember, movement is life. And if you look at good swimmers in the water, good swimmers are not people who can overcome any storm or any tide or any difficult challenge. No, smart swimmer actually knows when not to fight the tide. And if there's a storm, a good swimmer will just relax and go with the flow. And when it gets calm, that's when he'll do the forward thrust to move forward. Inexperienced swimmers, or for that matter in life in general, the same thing. Inexperienced navigators don't know how to navigate. They will fight when they should be actually they should be yielding. And they'll yield maybe when they should be fighting. So it's all about navigation, not about, someone says, I'd love to have, my life should have all the blessings, I shouldn't have any challenges. That's not what we should be asking for. We should be asking the following, that whatever challenge comes my way, I should have the strength and the wisdom to know how to deal with it. That's far more realistic. I want to be a swimmer and how to navigate. The Jewish people as a whole learned how to navigate. We not navigate. You know why? Because we never put our eggs in one basket. And we never saw life as a static, this is it. Even the highest moments. You're standing by a chuppah, the highest moment of a couple, you break a glass. You remember the destruction of the temple, or the other reasons we break a glass. Why? Let them have their moment of serenity, their moment of ecstasy, of euphoria is the word I was looking for. Because we always remember life is movement. And even if we're celebrating, there may be another person who's a broken heart. We don't forget them. So when we sometimes have something that breaks in us, we also realize it's not complete. It's part of a picture. As I said, nothing is as complete as a broken heart. So it's not about never having a break, it's knowing how to deal with a break. You can have a hole, you can have a crack. You look at the wall, it's a far from perfect wall. But it stands there silently as a reminder that perfection is not what we're looking for. We're looking to be able to deal with any challenge in life. They say in relationships, it's not perfection that you want to have. You want to have accountability. Trust is not based on perfection. You're going to say, I'll only be with someone who's perfect. They'll never make a mistake. They'll never betray me. They'll never abandon me. That's not realistic. Everyone makes mistakes. What you want is accountability. That a person navigates with you and knows that even if we have a setback, we'll figure out how to do something about it. The Jewish people as a whole are literally an unbelievable study that any anthropologist, sociologist should be studying for forever to understand resilience. As a whole, I say. Individually, sometimes we are not always living up to that. The Dalai Lama, anyone who comes to visit him is Jewish, he always asks one question. What is the secret of your survival without a country for so many years? Because remember, until recently, most Jews did not have a place to go. We were wandering. One place, another place. And of course, the Dalai Lama is dealing with his Tibetan exile. So he always wants to know, what's the secret? Because any smart person understands, this is what you want to study, success. I always say this in advertising. They always they advertise like brewing beer since 1867, in the furniture business for the last 70 years. You see it everywhere, established in whatever, because they want to create the brand loyalty that this is a family business. We've been around. You can trust us. We've been through trial and error. Even though, frankly, most of these businesses have changed hands, and that's just another logo that comes with the company. But hey, and I would say that look. We Jews have been in this business for 4,000 years almost. Nobody has been around as long as us. I hear people who do business in China, they say that the Chinese respect only Jews. They don't respect anybody. I don't know because we're Jews, it's probably because of the longevity. Because we're the only ones that are here longer than they are. And they respect, if you're a businessman, you respect the business that's been standing. How did you keep... Imagine you open up a business that someone can say 4,000 years from now it's still open. That's like insane. No one would imagine that. They say when Zhou Enlai, the Prime Minister of China, when it opened up in the early 70s, so the Western journalists asked him, they said, what's your opinion about the American and French revolutions? And his answer was, it's too early to tell. So we've been around a long time. We're a study in resilience, in eternity. And I think, personally, that's what we have to take strength from. So a guy told me this morning, he was staying where I'm staying, he says to me, why do Jews keep crying about Tisha B'Av? It's enough crying, let's celebrate, So I told him this crying is what allows us to celebrate, because we're real. You live in a world, and you know, as I said, that which can't kill you makes you stronger. So I want to say to each of us, even though it's a day we fasted, and it's a day that we pray, and we remember the destruction, Churban, the destruction. But remember that we're really doing Zecher. You don't say Zecher l'Churban, you say Zecher l'Migdash. It's better than saying Zecher l'Churban. Zecher l'Churban means to remember the destruction. You're remembering the temple. You're remembering what it stood for. And remember that we have the power to rebuild the temple within our hearts and souls. And that's what we come away with. It's not a day where you find that people said they're completely depressed and broken. And so, psychology, every therapist would love to know the secret. How do you give somebody hope and optimism when they feel despair? When they feel their life has betrayed them, when they feel they grew up in abusive homes or they're in environments that were unhealthy and dysfunctional. This is the secret. This is the day. It's a day where we can look at the beast in the eyes, we can look at the enemy in the eyes and say, you cannot kill me. Because what I have, my light is stronger than your darkness. And not only that, my light grows out of your darkness. Can you imagine that? Then you cannot destroy something, because no matter what darkness comes our way, Mashiach was born right now. Mashiach was born right now in the darkest of moments. So as we stand here concluding Tisha B'Av, and remembering that this is what Jews have been doing for now almost 2,000 years, hopefully we'll never have to do it again. The birth of Mashiach should actually come into full fruition. And above all, especially, you can't ignore the juxtaposition, the serendipity of what's happening today in this holy land, the siege of Jerusalem, the siege of Israel, enemies. Thank God today we have ability to defend ourselves. Just yesterday, Erev Tisha B'Av, we all know what happened here in Jerusalem. Literally the day before Tisha B'Av. I don't know if the guy that's driving that tractor, whatever he was driving, knew it was before Tisha B'Av. I would have told him to go speak to the Arab farmer, maybe his ancestor thousands of years ago, who said that when the cow groaned, the second groan was the birth of Mashiach. But I guess I didn't have that opportunity to do that. And hopefully we'll finally have not just a firefighting, putting out fires, we'll finally have a conclusion to this whole mess here. And I think that's only possible when we really understand that you have an enemy and not try to think you can negotiate with an enemy. And as I said, I'm not going to get into the whole politics of it or the strategy. It's not for right now. And we should finally have real Shalom al Yisrael, as they say. And our blessing and prayer is not just peace for Jews, it's peace for all people. Peace for Arabs, peace for Muslims, peace for every human being on this earth. And that real peace comes in the world of Mashiach when all the nations will serve one God. And say, this house will be a house of prayer for all the nations of the world, as we said in the Haftorah Shabbos. And as the conclusion, Isaiah, when he concludes his vision, his first vision of destruction, he ends, Zion will be redeemed through mishpat, which is law, Torah, and shaveh, and its captives through charity. Through our unity and our love for each other, and you saw this in this country now, you saw a certain unity that doesn't come every day. Fortunately, it comes when there's an enemy striking at us, and we're all equally in the enemy's we call it eye, not the eye.
Crosshairs.
What?
Crosshairs.
Crosshairs. There you go. That's the word. So that hopefully this unity will spill over, even when we don't have to rely on that. And ultimately, the destruction of the temple came through divisiveness. So its rebuilding will come through unity. And I hope we can create. If we can create a little unity among a group like ourselves here, we definitely can create unity in larger groups. I think each of us should feel charged. We're not bystanders. We all can make a difference. We have to see our lives, take the bull by the horns, and be people who are proactive. Proactive in the unity front, proactive in the fronts that I mentioned earlier, about holding on to something that's eternal. If you meet somebody, you see a friend or even a stranger that seems down and depressed, you have strength. Give them strength. Talk to them. Find some way to reach deeper into their hearts and souls. Because at the end of the day, as Yirmiyahu cried and bemoaned the fact that she sits all alone, Jerusalem, what's the antidote to being alone? Is bonding, is unity, is connecting, bonding. That's the antidote to the loneliness of Yerushalayim, the loneliness of the Jewish people, the loneliness that each of us experiences. So may we use this Tisha B'Av as a catalyst, a springboard for the greatest things, and the Mashiach should be born within each of us. The Moyer Naim writes that there's a Mashiach within every person. Every one of us has that power and strength, a redemption that's born in the ashes. Again, we should only know simchas, every one of us individually. So I bring you all warm regards, whoever was listening here, wherever you may be in the world, from Shulaimir HaKodesh, the old city right here, over the Temple Mount, and may we merit to see, even before sunset, the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi descend right over there, right on top of everything, in a very peaceful way, just settle in, and then we could all serve and in unity, and all the nations of the world will pray there to one God, each in their own way. So thank you very much, and we should only have simchas, and we should these days should be transformed into holidays, into joy, and to celebration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi Jacobson.